Welcome to the 2024 MMA Awards brought to you by Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levi, your guest co-host, the 2022 Half the Battle Handicapper of the Year, Andrew Gombas. Today, we're going to give out all our awards. Andrew Gombas, this has become a tradition. 3 years in a row we do this. Welcome back to Half the Battle.
Yeah, it's an honor. I love that I'm able to get the spot next to you for the end of the year show. And I can't believe this is how fast the time goes. End of 2024 is over. Before you know it, we'll be on our 10th edition of this.
Yeah. So let's get down to business. Let's find out who's going to claim these awards. So first category, the Knockout of the Year. And Andrew, you know that the Knockout of the Year is a very prestigious award. I mean, you're going to be joining legends like Anderson Silva, front kicking Vitor Belfort, BJ Penn, knocking out Sean Shirk and Matt Hughes. So to join this prestigious list, very elusive, you have to have a very memorable knockout. Here are the nominees for the 2024 Knockout of the Year. Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopai, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, Shara Magomedov versus Armin Petrosyan, Joaquin Buckley versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Esteban Ribovics versus Terrence McKinney, Carlos Praches versus Li Jingliang, and Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And the winner is Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopai. We got a consensus winner. And Andrew, the reason I went with this is because I truly felt like Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira set the tone for 2024 with that knockout. Not only was it one of the most insane flying knee KOs that I've ever seen in all my years watching the sport, but it was a bit of a comeback victory too. He took a licking and kept on ticking, goes out there, beautiful combo to the flying knee, face first out. Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira gets my Knockout of the Year.
Yeah, and obviously I picked the same one. Not much to add to what you said, but the way that Sopai fell was crazy. Like, he was just completely, removed from his consciousness. And, the fact that it happened later in the fight after it was, a pretty highly contested battle, flying knee, sick knockout. I think your fans would, if they don't already know, they'd appreciate the fact that we don't know each other's answers going into this. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. But yeah, cool that we're in consensus on the first one. Sick knockout. There were some great ones to choose from. All the ones you mentioned were particularly awesome. And, I'm sure there's plenty we were missing too.
Yeah, and shout out to Lockdog, man, because not only was that his UFC debut, but then he goes out there, beats Ricky Simon, and he's looking at a ranking for his very next fight. So that's exactly how you make a UFC debut with a Knockout of the Year. And to Andrew's point, he mentioned how we don't know each other's answers. Shout out to Meticulous, who made all these incredible graphics for the show. We submitted our answers to him separately. So I don't know any of Andrew's answers. He doesn't know any of mine. And we just happen to unanimously agree on the Knockout of the Year for the first category. So you love to see it. Now, Andrew, let's move on to the Submission of the Year. So the Submission of the Year, another great category because you're joining the ranks of Korean Zombie with his twister of Leonard Garcia, Anderson Silva with his comeback over Chael Sonnen. Here are the nominees for the 2024 Submission of the Year. Brian Ortega versus Yair Rodriguez, Paddy Pimblett versus Bobby Green, Cody Durden versus Matt Schnell, Vicente Luque versus Temba Garimbo, Gabriela Fernandez versus Kong Wong, and Hamza Chimaev versus Robert Whitaker. And the winners are Vicente Luque versus Temba Garimbo and Cody Durden versus Matt Schnell. I'm going to let you take this first. You took Vicente Luque versus Garimbo. I know that was one of the best bets of the year. Take it away.
Yeah, so a few reasons I picked this one of which being, he went to his bread and butter there. His front chokes, his Darce chokes are really, have been a staple in his game for a long time. He was an underdog coming into that fight. It happened in I think it was less than a minute. He finished that choke. When he gets in that position, he's so dangerous. And the fact that, Garimbo went out completely cold in such a short amount of time just speaks to how tight of a choke that really is. And, I included the circumstance. I weighed the circumstances too. Luque was coming into that fight after kind of a weirdly bad performance against Joaquin Buckley, who, I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the show at some point. But, a lot of question marks around him. He's not particularly an old guy, but he does have a lot of miles on him. So going into that fight, there were a lot of question marks. the fact that he went out there and answered it in under a minute and, finished his signature choke against a guy coming in on a win streak, for me, the choke itself was executed flawlessly. The circumstances surrounding it, these are all things that I weighed making my decision. But yeah, for me, it was Luque over Garimbo.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And also, I heard there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that we never saw. Apparently, Garimbo was talking all kinds of stuff to Luque backstage before the weigh-ins and before the media day and all this kind of stuff that never surfaced. So it was an extra sweet victory for Luque, not just to knock him down, not just to choke him out, but to put him unconscious and win Andrew Gombas' 2024 Submission of the Year. For me, I'm giving it to Cody Durden over Matt Schnell for similar reasons as you. I mean, he was up against it, coming off 2 back-to-back losses. He took the fight on 4 days short notice, Gombas. He makes weight, no problem. And he goes out there, just like you were talking about, a front choke with Luque and Garimbo. This was another excellent front choke, a ninja choke. I sent it to my brother. He was like, it was like a rolling alligator death choke. I was like, okay, if that's the kind of response that casuals have, that's going to be my Submission of the Year. Cody Durden, congratulations, kid. You got the 2024 Submission of the Year. Now, Gombas, we got to talk about the Fight of the Year, because you don't just get a Fight of the Year if you didn't absolutely throw down. And, joining this list, you're going to be up there with guys like Justin Gaethje, who have always historically put on incredible wars, the Dustin Poiriers, the Korean Zombies, Randy Couture versus Nogueira, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here are the nominees for the 2024 Fight of the Year. Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje, Esteban Ribovics versus Daniel Zellhuber, Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier, Mateusz Rambetsky versus Miktabek Oralbai, and Vinicius Oliveira versus Bernardo Sopai. And the winners are Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya and Esteban Ribovics versus Daniel Zellhuber. So I'm going to go first. My pick was Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. And the reason why is pretty simple. I haven't been that pumped for a fight in years, let alone that pumped for a fight that actually delivered, Gombas, because I know you remember Rampage versus Rashad, and there had never been a build-up to a fight before like that, where it's like, oh my God, I have to watch this. All my casual friends are calling me, telling me they have to watch it, and the fight just didn't deliver. Rampage versus Rashad absolutely sucked. But when you have an insane buildup, and I'm talking about when Izzy got into the cage and he starts challenging Dricus, he's like, yeah, my African brother. Like, dude, I was just getting pumped. And the fact that the fight delivered, it was this back and forth fight with all kinds of momentum swings. At first, you're thinking, okay, Dricus is dominating. Oh, look, Izzy's taking over. Now Dricus is back in it. Now Dricus is on his back, choking him out. Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, the Africa versus Africa super fight, is my 2024 Fight of the Year.
Yeah, that's a great choice. For me, I went with Zellhuber versus Ribovics, just because it was so much action-packed into a 15-minute fight. Like, I'm looking at the stats right now. They landed a combined almost 300 significant strikes. And that fight, it was really a miracle that it even went 15 minutes because, hard shots landed on both sides. I thought at one point Zellhuber was done. I thought they were going to step in and stop that fight, but they kept it going. Almost 200 head strikes, just an all-out brawl. They did that special card for Mexico, and this fight delivered more than any other fight on that card, in my opinion. Delivered as much or more as any fight this entire year.
Yeah, that fight was incredible, and it was even more amazing with the production they had at the Sphere. I've never seen anything like it, and I wasn't even there. I was watching at home, and it felt like a surreal experience. And those two, Ribovics and Zellhuber, just going to war. They both have bright futures. Can't wait to see what they do in 2025. And congrats to them for Andrew Gombas' pick for the 2024 Fight of the Year. Now we got to talk about the Fighter of the Year. So I know last year we unanimously picked Sean Strickland. I mean, he goes out there, upsets Izzy Adesanya for the belt, and had a big win streak that year, coming off losses the prior year against Poatan, against Jared Cannonier. So Strickland unanimously won our Fighter of the Year. Let's see if we have a unanimous pick this year as well. So the nominees for Fighter of the Year are Alex Pereira, Ilia Topuria, Islam Makhachev, Dricus du Plessis, Alexandre Pantoja, and Merab Dvalishvili. And the winner for the 2024 Fighter of the Year is Ilia Topuria. I mean, Gombas, for me, it was a no-brainer, and I'll tell you why. Everyone's going to say, well, how could it have not been Alex? He took so many short notice opportunities. He defended his belt 3 times, all 3 by knockout, and 2 of them against former champions. So Alex has a very good case. But the reason I went with Topuria is Topuria also knocked out 2 former champions. However, the 2 former champions that Topuria knocked out are the GOATs of his division. I'm a huge Jamal Hill and Jiri fan, but the reality is that Jamal and Jiri, they're not the GOATs of their divisions. Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski are the GOATs of the featherweight division. And Ilia Topuria didn't just, win a controversial split decision. He knocked both of them out, including Max, who had never been knocked out. And to take it a step further, Gombas, he did it with the new gloves, which have statistically shown to have a much lower knockout rate. Ilia Topuria is my 2024 Fighter of the Year.
Yeah, when you said no-brainer, it completely resonated with me. I filled this one out in 2 seconds because there was no one even close. Picture it this way. Picture a couple years ago, someone told you, yeah, there's going to be someone that comes along and knocks out Volkanovski and Holloway in back-to-back fights. You'd be like, holy shit, was it Superman? Like it didn't even seem possible at one point. Max Holloway was regarded as the most durable guy in the history of the sport. Volkanovski seemingly unbeatable, and he, as decisively as you could possibly finish someone, he finished both them back to back. No brainer for me. He's my Fighter of the Year.
Now we got to talk about the upset of the year, and the upset of the year, another prestigious category. I mean, you're going to be joining the likes of TJ Dillashaw back when he had that insane upset of Renan Barão and all the incredible upsets we've had throughout the year. So the nominees for the 2024 upset of the year are Neil Magny versus Mike Malott, Carlos Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Rambetsky, Gabriela Fernandez versus Kong Wong, Brandon Royval versus Tatsuro Taira, Nicholas Mata versus Tom Nolan, and Austin Lane versus Robelis Despain. And the winners for the 2024 upset of the year are Gabriela Fernandez against Kong Wong and Carlos Diego Ferreira versus Mateusz Rambetsky. You went with Carlos Diego Ferreira. Tell us why.
Yeah, I went with CDF for a few reasons. That was one of those fights where going into it, obviously Ferreira was a big underdog. He's a guy who's been around the sport for a long time, that paid his dues for a long time, fought amazing people. He had that war with Gregor Gillespie. He fought Gamrot, Beneil Dariush, Pettis is a former champ. He's been fighting, killer after killer for a long time. People were totally counting him out against Mateusz Rebecki, who I think is a very good fighter. But one of the reasons I bet on Ferreira in that fight is I've seen this guy go to war with people who I consider, top 5 fighters in the division, top 7 fighters in the division. Even assuming Mateusz is that great of a fighter, which we're not so at the time, I'm not sold whether he is or isn't. I'm like, I don't even think this line's right then. I actually am picking CDF to win this fight. He's so hard to grapple. He's as legit of a submission grappler as there is in the division, and it's really what sold it for me and why I ultimately picked him as upset of the year. It's the way that it happened. It wasn't some punch that just happened to land home. That fight, he dragged Rebecki into deep waters and tripled him up in significant strikes and ended up finishing him at the very, very end of the fight. And, he looked like the favorite in that fight. So to me, that's why I picked him for upset of the year, is because of how much he was of how good he is, how counted out he was, and how he ended up, handedly winning the fight. So for me, that's my upset of the year.
Yeah, and that's a great one. And Carlos Diego Ferreira, such a badass. Actually, check this out. The old school Carlos Diego Ferreira shirt from when he knocked out Ramsey Nijam.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Know what I'm saying? But for me, I went with Kong Wong. I went with Gabriela Fernandez upsetting Kong Wong. I mean, this was the biggest underdog of the whole year, minus the kid that fought Isaac Dulgarian. Brendan Moreau maybe was his name. Isaac was like a minus 3,000 favorite and smoked the kid. And I think it might have even went over a round and a half, and people were messaging Isaac like all kinds of threats and stuff like that, because he was like a minus 3,300, and it took him a little longer than people expected, but it was still an absolute beatdown. But I went with Gabriela Fernandez because she was the biggest underdog to win of the year. She was completely counted out. The girl that she was up against had a win over Valentina Shevchenko in pure kickboxing, comes into the UFC, knocks out Victoria Leonardo. People are already saying this girl is going to be the one to dethrone Valentina. She's going to go on and do all these things. Gabriela Fernandez comes in there unassuming, drops her, chokes her unconscious. The Joker dies once again, and Gabriela Fernandez wins the 2024 upset of the year. Now we got to talk about the breakthrough fighter of the year. This is 2024 was not their rookie year, but 2024 was the year where they really broke through and all their hard work started to pay off. Now you're taking note of these guys or girls. So the nominees for the 2024 breakthrough fighter of the year are Tom Aspinall, Mario Bautista, Joaquin Buckley, Carlos Praches, Diego Lopez, and Umar Nurmagomedov. And the winners are Joaquin Buckley and Mario Bautista. Now, I'll go first. I would go first with Joaquin Buckley, but I know the fans are going to give you a lot of pushback on that Mario Bautista pick. So I think you should address the elephant in the room first.
I knew that coming in, but when I really thought about what the award means, you just described it perfectly. It's a fighter who, isn't necessarily new, but broke out. And going into this year, Mario Bautista was coming off of wins over, like, easy wins, for lack of a better term, against like Benito Lopez, Guido Canetti. And you could say what you want about how entertained you were in his fight against Jose Aldo. But don't forget, to start the year off, he dominated Ricky Simón, who's been a top guy for a long time. I'm looking at the significant strike count right now, 112-45. Simón couldn't control him at all. That was a sick performance. So, without even getting into the Aldo fight yet, he went from, killing guys like Benito Lopez. He beat Jay Perrin, Brian Kelleher. Nothing against those guys, but to step up and fight Ricky Simón and just win the way he did, it to me is a breakthrough. And then to go and fight Jose Aldo, who I know that wasn't an entertaining fight. I know he's not winning over any fans with that. But to me, he earns a lot of respect from beating guys, like I said, Guido Canetti in 2023, to beating Ricky Simón and Jose Aldo. And again, not my most entertaining fight of the year, but to me, that's a breakthrough, beating Ricky Simón and Jose Aldo. He's cemented himself as a player in this division now.
Yeah, it does not matter what you thought about the Aldo fight, because when you beat Jose Aldo, that means you're only going to get big fights from here on out. So just by getting that dub, and let's not forget, the current UFC bantamweight champion, Merab Dvalishvili, also had an equally boring fight against Jose Aldo. Aldo's tough to take down. He's got legendary takedown defense. But the point here is that Mario Bautista finally broke through, and his next fight is going to be a top 10 or top 15 showdown. So that's a very good pick. For me, it was another no-brainer. I went with Joaquin Buckley. I mean, this is a guy that at middleweight, he was paying his dues up a weight class, but he was kind of, around the 500 mark, slightly above it. He's 5-4 at middleweight. He drops the welterweight. All of a sudden, this guy's on a 6-0 run. And Gombas, in 1 year alone, in 2024, this guy comes out there. He takes out Luque. He takes out Wonder Boy. He takes out Colby, all by finish. Yeah. I mean, now you're number 6 in the world. You went from being unranked when this year started. Now you're number 6 in the world. Joaquin Buckley is my breakthrough fighter of the year. Now, the performance of the year. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure last year I gave it to Strickland over Adesanya. I thought that was one of the best performances of the year, and there's been many incredible performances along the years. I mean, we mentioned earlier TJ Dillashaw against Renan Barão. That was one of the best upsets of the year at the time. It's also one of the best performances of all time. So now we're going to find out who's going to be joining in that category for performance of the year. Here are the nominees. Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi. Ilya Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski. Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prohaska, the second time. Fluffy Hernandez versus Michelle Pereira. John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. And Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura. And the winners are Alex Pereira against Yuri Prohaska the second time, and Brandon Moreno versus Amir Albazi. Now, I was the one that picked Alex Pereira versus Yuri. Why did I pick that? Because the first time they fought, I walked away thinking, hey, that was a 50-50 fight with an early stoppage. Like, we had to see a rematch. Like, there was no conclusive ending to that fight. It could have gone either way, this and that, whatever. They rematched, and Gombas, it could have not been more drastically different than the first time they fought, because Alex Poatan just goes out there. He puts an absolute clinic on Yuri Prohaska. There was nothing 50-50 about the second fight. It was more like 99-1. You know what I'm saying? And knocks him out with the left hook at the end of round 1. They didn't call it. Knocks him out again with a head kick in round 2. Alex Pereira against Yuri in the rematch. That's my performance of the year in 2024.
Yeah, that's a great choice. And I feel like my choice probably will surprise some people, but I picked Brandon Moreno over Amir Albazi for a couple of reasons. One is because going into that fight, Moreno was kind of, I don't want to say down or looked down upon, because he was still the favorite, albeit like a slight one going into that fight. He was coming off 2 split decision losses in a row. So, top guys in the division. People were kind of saying, oh, it seems like this is Albazi's time to make his mark at the top of the division. And Moreno just went out there and beat him pillar to post. Like there wasn't a single round that got scored for Albazi. Like if you looked at their faces at the end of the fight, like Albazi's face was messed up. Moreno looked like, he just took a walk in the park. He put on a clinic in that fight, and to me, he proved that he's still one of the top dogs in that division. So for me, that was my top performance of 2024.
And I got to give you credit, Andrew. You have a special talent for taking these fighters that are undervalued, that people are completely counting out, that once had great runs, that now everyone's saying, hey, we're done with these guys. And you're saying, hey, they still got life left. Look at Luque. Look at CDF against Rambetsky. And now look at your pick right here with Brandon Moreno against Amir Albazi. All the same kind of ordeal. So that's a very sharp angle on your part, and I hope that's one you continue to pursue in 2025.
Appreciate that.
Now we got to talk about the rookie of the year. So when Anderson Silva made his debut against Chris Lieben, it went without a shadow of a doubt that this guy's the rookie of the year. Now, in recent times, I gave it to Natalia Silva. So, we kept it amongst the Silvas, but there's been a lot of rookies of the years throughout the years. So let's find out who the nominees are for the 2024 Half the Battle Rookie of the Year. Carlos Prates, Kayla Harrison, Gene Silva, Mauricio Hufi, Felipe Lima, and Vinicius Lockdog Oliveira. And the winners for the 2024 Rookie of the Year are Carlos Prates and Gene Silva. So we both went with fighting nerds. I mean, the reason I went with Carlos Prates was a no-brainer for me, man. 4 wins, 4 knockouts. You go from unranked to ranked. He had a main event, and now he's calling out top 5 guys like Jack Della Maddalena. So when you go from no one's ever heard of you to now you end the year talking about top 5 showdowns, every single win has been a highlight reel knockout. They're comparing you to the great Anderson Silva. Yeah, Carlos Prates easily won my Rookie of the Year, no contest.
Yeah, that's a great one. I went with Gene Silva, continuing your Silva tradition, I guess.
I like it.
Rookie of the Year, but 3-0 in 2024, 3 knockouts. He did it in the first round, second round, and third round. So, answering questions about cardio late in the fight. First fight was against Weston Wilson, who isn't exactly like high tier UFC competition. So it's like, all right, we know this Gene Silva kid has power. We know he could finish a guy like Weston Wilson. Let's put him in there with Charles Jourdain. He goes out there and finishes Charles Jourdain, who, has been in the UFC for a long time, has a lot of people's respect. Then it's like, all right, let's go up a weight and fight Drew Dober, who has one of the best chins, who's a great striker, and he goes out there and knocks Drew Dober out. I mean, to me, that was like, all right, I salute you. I'm a believer now. So that, to me, that was the one that really put it over the top. So Gene Silva, 2 different weight classes, 3 finishes, all 3 different rounds against good fighters. That's my guy for this one.
Yeah, and what's funny too is that he threw his name in the hat to fight Movsar Evloev, because you remember Aljo and Evloev, they were scheduled to fight once before, and Aljo unfortunately had to pull due to an injury. And this dude, Gene Silva, was like, hey, let me fight Evloev. They're like, hey, calm down, kid. You just made your debut this year. But that speaks to the kind of guy you're talking about, the kind of fighter who he'll just go in there. It doesn't matter the weight class, doesn't matter the opponent. He's willing to fight anyone, anytime, any place. And those are the kind of qualities you love. So, yeah, he's absolutely up there. Now we got to talk about the story of the year. So here are the nominees for the 2024 Story of the Year. Dana White's love and insistence of John Jones being the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. John Jones versus Tom Aspinall debacle. Francis Ngannou's comeback fight versus Renan Ferreira, Brazilian champs Pereira and Pantoja holding down the UFC, and the UFC's record-breaking event at the Sphere. So the winners for the 2024 Story of the Year are John Jones versus Tom Aspinall debacle and the Brazilian champions Pereira and Pantoja holding it down for the UFC. Gombas, you went with Pereira and Pantoja. Let's hear why.
Yeah, so name-wise this year, there weren't a ton of, star power on it. There wasn't star power on every pay-per-view. Like there was no McGregor fight this year. There wasn't a ton going on in terms of like champ. This year for me, like what kept casuals interested and what brought some of the fun to these pay-per-view cards were the heavy Brazilian champ in Perrin and the lighter Brazilian champ in Pantoja. Combined, they went 5-0. I mean, obviously Pereira 3 knockouts in 3 fights, and he showed more of his personality out of the octagon this year. So I think he gained a lot of fans that way. For me, the fact that the two of them, fought good people, like obviously, Pereira fought Jamal Hill, who's a champ, Yuri Prohaska, who's a champ level, tough fight for anyone. Khalil Roundtree, who was on a roll going into that fight, and he finished him. Then Pantoja got a couple different challenges thrown his way. Like he fought Urseg, who was on a roll in the beginning of the year. Went a hard 5 rounds with him. Got his hand raised there. Last event of the year, they pull in a new guy who's never fought in the UFC before and said, all right, you've beaten Royval, you've beaten Moreno, you've beaten Urseg. Try this guy. And he goes out there and submits him in the 2nd round. So for me, that was the story of the UFC this year, was those two, kind of holding it down, for lack of a better term. Like, especially, like how many times did Makhachev fight this year? It can't be more than like twice. It might have even only been once. Let me see.
Against Poirier for sure. And was the Volk rematch last year?
Yep. So only 1 fight from Makhachev this year. Chimaev wasn't like super active. So some of the guys you might look to for to bring in fans, like the Jones Stipe fight happened at the end of the year, and not a ton of people were rushing to buy that fight. So for me, those guys put the UFC on their back this year.
Yeah, Pantoja, Pereira, anyone, anytime, any place, true champions and Brazilian legends at this point. So you love to see it. For me, I went with Jones versus Aspinall debacle because there's one story we could not get away from in 2024. Is John Jones ducking Aspinall? Is this and that? And John Jones literally in his post-fight interview after the Stipe fight, he said, we're gonna have some negotiations, and if things go our way, we're gonna give the people what they want. So Jones, as far as I'm concerned, I think he's willing to fight Aspinall, but people are calling him a duck, and every single week there's like some kind of updates. Oh, now negotiations are going down. Oh, now ESPN reports that Dana White says his most anticipated fight of 2025 is Jones versus Aspinall. You cannot get away from this fight, and I don't want to. I want to see this fight. So Jones versus Aspinall debacle, that's my story of the year for 2024.
Is the story over, though? I think that story might carry into 2025. So I'm curious to see how it ends, just to chime in on that one.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good point. That story's not over at all. And I'm going to go ahead and predict. I know there's not a prediction show at this point. This is just the awards, but I'm going to predict the fight happens sooner than a lot of you think.
Agreed.
Now, Gombas, my favorite category, the J. Perrin Jobber of the Year. It doesn't get any better than this. J. Perrin, the GOAT jobber against Raul Rosas, all the shit he was talking, and then that performance. Yeah. So the category is named after him. And here are the nominees for the 2024 J. Perrin Jobber of the Year: Antonio Tricoli, Herbert Burns, Don Davis, Colby Covington, Robelis Despain, Lukasz Brzeski, and Kron Gracie. And the winners for the 2024 J. Perrin Jobber of the Year are Don Davis and Robelis Despain. Congratulations to you two. Come claim your award. Listen, I didn't go with a fighter this year. I went with Don Davis. Reason being why he's the CEO or president of PFL. For those that don't know, the reason I went with him is because when you call yourself the co-leader, That already, I'm like, dude, you call yourself the co-leader. You have amateur fights on your cards. The majority of your champions are asking for their releases. I tune in to watch your cards, and there's like rappers and entertainment shows on. They do the national anthem in like 10 different languages. Like, I don't got time for all that shit. I just want to watch some entertaining fights. And everyone's complaining. Like the higher up guys are complaining. Like Patchy Mix wants a release. Patricio Pitbull wants a release. Gegard Mousasi sued the company. Douglas Lima was unhappy. Like, it's like the only person happy is like Francis Ngannou, right? And Jake Paul. So Don Davis is my 2024 Jay Perrin Jobber of the Year.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that a little bit, their pacing has been a complaint among fans for years, and they've done little to nothing to fix it. Like, to me, that's such an easy fix that they just haven't been able to figure out. So that's a great pick. I went with Robelis Despaigne, 0-2 in his last 2 fights. Massive favorite in both of them. Waldo Cortez Acosta and Austin Lane both, had their way with him grappling. He comes over to the UFC, he's got a karate background. He's massive. He's hyped. He comes in doing his silly like movements in the octagon, and the guy looks like he's never trained grappling in his entire life. So a guy like Austin Lane, who probably was going to get cut if he had lost 2 in a row with a no contest going into that fight, and was probably getting cut if he didn't win. And he goes out there and, takes him down 3 times and controls him for 9 minutes. Despaigne proved he doesn't belong in the big leagues. I think he's actually fighting today or tomorrow in Karate Combat as a minus 3,000 favorite. So as someone who's faded him in both those fights, I might have to look into the other guy, because minus 3,000 for a guy like Robelis Despaigne, he's proven that he's proven that he's more than capable of dropping the ball as a big favorite. And to me, that he wins the Jay Perrin Jobber of the Year award.
Don't you get like 15 seconds of ground control in Karate Combat? Like you can be on the ground for like 15 seconds at a time. Like, is that true or not?
I don't know, but that might be enough against him.
So, I know nothing about his opponents. So.
No, me neither. I don't either. I just literally saw like a headline on Twitter today.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great pick for the reasons you mentioned, but also the hype this guy had coming into the UFC. He's got the same reach as John Jones. He's 6'7". He's an Olympian. He got that first knockout against that other jobber Parisian. We're like, oh shit, okay, there's a new Ngannou in town. Nope. When Waldo Cortez Acosta, who's only known for throwing hands, now he's a D1 wrestler. Like, you know what I'm saying? When Austin Lane looks like he's got a couple championship plaques on his wall that says he can wear a singlet and take you down. That's all I need to know. So I agree with you. Now, my second favorite category is the Darrick Minner Stunt of the Year. I don't know if anyone can ever top the stunt that Darrick Minner pulled, but I know that these few nominees tried. Here are the nominees for the 2024 Darrick Minner Stunt of the Year. Vitor Petrino against Anthony Smith. Antonio Tricoli getting smoked in and out the UFC. Josh Fremd missing weight, pulling out on fight day and getting cut. Cody Brundage quitting in every other fight. Robelis Despaign's 2 abysmal performances. Piera Rodriguez dominating Carnelossi and then headbutting her. And Kong Wong against Gabriela Fernandez. The winners for the Darrick Minner Stunt of the Year award are Kong Wong against Gabriela Fernandez and Piera Rodriguez headbutting Carnelossi after dominating the fight. Now, I went with Kong Wong against Gabriela Fernandez. Reason being, when you come in dressed as the Joker, you're the second biggest favorite of the year, right behind Isaac Dulgarian, like we talked about, and you're so arrogant in the lead up. You're doing all these things, and then you go out there and get smoked by the second biggest underdog of the year. Yeah, that's my Darrick Minner 2024 Stunt of the Year. Congrats, Kong Wong.
The second you were reading the nominees, I thought for sure you were going to pick Cody Brundage. I was like, oh, that's the one. I went with Piera Rodriguez against Carnelossi. That one's near and dear to my heart. I had a pretty sizable bet on Piera Rodriguez there. she's gonna finish the fight. She gets on top, and she not once, not twice, but like multiple times starts headbutting the girl on the ground. I'm like, what do you think's gonna, like, it's one of the only rules in the sport. Like, there aren't many rules in MMA. You punch someone, you kick them. You're literally trying to remove them from their consciousness. One of the only things you can't do is headbutt someone. And she's like a minus 5,000 fight favorite live, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? It was funny. I had my my bachelor party that day, and me and my friends are sitting there watching the fight, and they all bet the stuff that I bet, so we're all interested in the fight. And I'm like, oh my, they're not even big MMA fans. They don't even know what happened. I'm like, guys, she's not going to continue. We're going to lose. And they're like, no, they wouldn't do that. I'm like, watch. And sure enough, DQ, however much money of a swing that was for me. But yeah, near and dear to my heart. One of the lowest IQ moves I've ever seen in the history of the sport. So for me, that's the Darrick Minner stunt of the year.
Not to correct you, was it a DQ or a no contest? It was DQ?
DQ.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And to your credit, man, I mean, it'd be one thing if you're getting dominated, you're desperate, you have to pull out some dirty tricks, you headbutt someone because you're down on the cards. Not to excuse that, but that's a different scenario.
Yeah.
You're beating someone up pillar to post. Like Gombas said, you're a minus 5,000 favorite live, meaning the bookies don't want to take your action on this girl because it's evident that she's whooping, her opponent's ass, and the chances of her losing are so minimal. It's like, and then she goes out there, not just throws one headbutt, 2 headbutts, when all she had to do was, you're on top of the girl, you got her rock, control her for the next couple of minutes. Yeah, I think that's a great pick, man. I mean, because I don't have any explanation for that. But let me say this: shout out to Pierre bouncing back against Josephine Knutson. I'm not sure if you were on that or not, but it was very sharp. Whoever took the +2 something, but I get why you wouldn't want to after what she pulled last time. But man, seeing Knutson's ground game against Pilastri, I was like, shit, like maybe this girl has something for her. But then when I watched your stunt of the year performance, I was like, I can't do it,
Yeah, I mean, it was never before seen levels of yeah, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're gonna study that for years, you know what I'm saying? Like, they're gonna, hopefully she lives a full life, but when it's done, they're gonna study her brain in the clinic, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Now we gotta talk about the #1 pound for pound fighter on the roster. So obviously this is a very subjective pick, just like all of them, but this one specifically. So let's get down to business. Here are the nominees for the current #1 pound for pound fighter on the UFC roster: Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, John Jones, Alex Pereira, Bilal Muhammad, and Dricus du Plessis. And the winners for the #1 pound for pound fighter on the roster are John Jones and Ilia Topuria. Now, I picked Jones, Gombas picked Topuria. Now, I wish you picked someone else so I could be like, well, how could you pick that guy? My guy's never lost a fight. Well, your guy's never lost a fight either, but my guy's got like the most title defenses in the history of the sport. I get it, though. You can criticize his heavyweight run. Like, Gon was ranked #1 at the time, but people wanted to see the Ngannou fight during his 3-year break, from the Reyes fight to the Gon fight. People didn't want to see the defense against Stipe. They want to see a defense against Aspinall. But all that being said, Gombas, this guy still never lost a fight. And more importantly, I know this is not everyone else's definition of pound for pound, but I just simply think John Jones can beat everyone's ass on the list. So he's my #1 pound for pound fighter.
It's so hard to argue with that. And, just to set the record straight, I think he would beat all those guys you mentioned too. Like, the reason I went with Topuria is because, like we mentioned, it's who he beat, how he beat them, like how well-rounded his skill set is. Like, the guy's a serious jiu-jitsu black belt, and he's knocking out Max Holloway and Alexander Volkanovski. And I think he actually could have success at 155 as well. And it's just, to me, he's so well-rounded. He's right in his prime. To me, he's #1 right now.
Man, I was a little disheartened to hear he's considering being done at featherweight. I feel like this guy could have a historic run. I mean, he already has with the 2 title wins, but I'm saying, like, you go out there, beat Evloev, beat Diego Lopez, and maybe beat Volk in a rematch. And all of a sudden, like, how many title defenses is that? Like, he could be one of the greatest featherweights of all time, but his coaches were saying, hey, that cut is just getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And I think he can do great at 55s. My only concern is the height. But then again, you saw how good Volk did against Islam the first time they fought. So maybe the height isn't a factor. I mean, Matt Serra knocked out GSP, so maybe I'm looking into that too much. But yeah, I think Ilia Topuria is obviously a top 3 pound for pound guy, no debate. So great pick there. The gym of the year. So every year a different gym comes by that goes on a heater. You know, back in the day, it used to be Jackson Wink. When they were on their heaters, then everyone left that gym. People said they fell off. There's been so many gyms that have come, gone, stayed, whatever the case may be. But in 2024, we only got a couple nominees. So the nominees for the 2024 Gym of the Year are the Fighting Nerds, Valley Flow Striking Academy, American Kickboxing Academy, American Top Team, Lobo Gym, and Extreme Couture. And the winner is the Fighting Nerds. I mean, Gombas, this was pretty obvious, and we had a consensus pick here. When you produce 4 candidates for Rookie of the Year in 2024, Carlos Prates, Gene Silva, Mauricio Hufi. Who's the other one?
Who am I forgetting?
Who's the 4th Fighting Nerd?
Kyle Brawlhall.
Oh, yeah. And yeah. Kyle Bohaya. I mean, it's like Kyle didn't make his debut this year, but the other 3 did.
Yeah.
It's like all these guys are headed towards the rankings. Some of them are headed towards the top 5 of their divisions, Bohio and Prates. And then you got Gene Silva, who's Andrew Gombas' Rookie of the Year, who's right behind them. Mauricio Hufi, also undefeated in the UFC, doing his thing. So it's an absolute no-brainer that the Fighting Nerds win the Gym of the Year in 2024.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. To me, this is as easy of a pick. Like, some of these choices are really hard. Like, you know, the pound for pound one, it's like, splitting hairs between Topuria, John Jones, guys like that. For this one, I didn't even consider anybody else.
Now we got to talk about the Coach of the Year. So this is our last of the year award. So let's see who the 2024 nominees are for the Coach of the Year. Eric Nixick, Francisco Grasso, Marcos Pahumpa Damata, Polinio Cruz, Lewis Taylor, and the legendary Khabib Nurmagomedov. And the winners for the 2024 Coach of the Year are Lewis Taylor and Polinio Cruz. Gombas, you went with Polinio Cruz. Tell us why.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just because I like his what he brings to the table in terms of like a guy like Alex Pereira. It just seems like he's so involved and he gets the most out of his fighters in big performances. You know, like Perrin, for example, had 3 really big performances this year. And I just feel like he's good at maximizing his fighters' potential. So this year he had a ton of success. I went with him, but there's some great options.
I think that's a fantastic option. And one thing that your Coach of the Year has in common with my Coach of the Year is that he's a former professional fighter. Not every coach is a former fighter. Not saying that they need to be at all. But the reason I went with Lewis Taylor as the 2024 Coach of the Year is because this guy won the PFL championship by knockout against Abus Magomedov, who's currently in the UFC on a win streak. So you go from being a world champion, you win the Millie in PFL. Hey, you could have retired and put your feet up, but then you give back to your community. You take Bilal Muhammad to become a world champion. So you go from being a world champion yourself to now your star pupil who you've been with since high school. Now he's a world champion. I mean, it does not get better than that. Lewis Taylor, congrats, man. You're the 2024 Coach of the Year. Now, Gombas, moving on to the next section of the show. So now it's more kind of like a draft pick style, less award. We're going to talk about the best bets of 2024 first. Then we're going to get to the worst bets. So let's start off with our best bets of 2024. You mentioned one. I mentioned one. Let's give our reasoning. Let's go back and forth. I'm looking at the list now. You only mentioned 3 best bets. I mentioned a bit more than that, but also mentioned a lot of worst bets too. But let's get into it. What's your first best bet of 2024?
If you did more than me, I could rattle a few more off. Like I could remember a few more.
Awesome.
First, I went with Fluffy Hernandez at -135 against Michel Pereira. I actually almost used that one for the best performance of 2024. I mean, the best way I could describe that is he tormented Michel Pereira in that octagon. And if they fought again next week, I think Hernandez would have to be like minus 400 or higher. I don't really see much of a path to victory for Pereira outside of an early knockout. Hernandez obviously weaponizes pace. He's a good grappler, and yeah, that was a pillar to post type of victory. So minus 135 to me was ridiculously off.
Yeah, Fluffy Hernandez is a matchup problem, and he could be a threat to the title. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
For me, my first one was Brandon Royval plus 260 against Tatsuro Taira. I mean, when you talk about recency bias, you talk about Brandon Royval plus 260 against Taira. And when I say recency bias, Gombas, it's not even like Royval was coming off a loss or anything. He beat Brandon Moreno, the best flyweight on the planet besides Pantoja. And he's a plus 260 dog to Taira, who I get it, young stud, but completely unproven at the top 5 of the division. It was a no-brainer for me. Brandon Royval plus 260. I had no option. I mean, if he was coming off a loss, like the Pantoja loss, and that was the line, I still would have bet it. But coming off the Moreno performance, yeah, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So that's my first one.
Yeah, that's a great one. I actually ended up on that one too. It's just one of those spots where, like, even if you think Taira is like one of the best guys in the division, Royval shouldn't be plus 260 to anyone at that weight class. That going in, I'm like, all right, this is a toss-up fight. So how do you not take the plus 260? Second, I went with Merab plus 115 against Sean O'Malley. This was actually this might have been the biggest bet I made all year. It was definitely right up there. I just thought going in, even as someone who's backed Sean O'Malley multiple times, a handful of times actually on his way up to the title, I always kind of held the belief that Merab was an awful stylistic matchup for him. And I think that proved to be true. I think if they fought again tomorrow, Merab would be a big favorite there. And the fact that I got plus money on that when he pretty much dominated the fight, bell to bell, for me was a steal.
Incredible bet. And anytime you get a world-class fighter like that at dog odds, it's, yeah. And speaking of which, this guy's plus 250 in his next fight. I know the opponent's incredible, but Merab is still a plus 250 dog. Will be interesting to see what you do with that. Now, for me, my next best bet of the year was Mateusz Rambecki plus 270 against Orolbai. So you mentioned how Rambecki was coming off the Carlos Diego fight. And again, back to the recency bias. He's minus 400 against Carlos Diego Ferreira. Now, all of a sudden, he's a plus 270 dog to a kid that's only 2-0 in the UFC. Don't get me wrong. Orolbai is an absolute stud, but so is Rambecki. And that fight should have been a minus 110 pick'em, maybe minus 125 Rambecki. Either way, plus 270, no brainer. I took it. That's one of my best bets of the year.
Yeah, that was another one that I was on. So I'll use that as my next one. Like you said, you're kind of, I talked about him being overpriced against CDF earlier in the year, and I backed CDF. And then there was another overcorrection on the back end of the year where he was a big underdog to Orolbai. And so, buy low, sell high. And that's why I liked him in that spot. Again, I felt like it was anyone's fight, which, proved to be true. And, plus 270 or whatever the number was a no-brainer.
My next best bet of the year was probably the most profitable fighter in the history of the sport, which is Belal Muhammad. You can't name me one person that's gotten rich fading Belal Muhammad. You just can't. Like, I don't care what you think about the guy outside of fighting. Everyone's welcome to their opinion. But when it comes to actually fighting and numbers and all that, Belal Muhammad is single-handedly the most profitable angle in MMA betting. I mean, zero recency bias, zero market overcorrection, always value. This guy's consistently undervalued every fight. And you'd think people would catch on. He's an underdog in his next fight too. So, I mean, plus 225 against Leon. Yeah, that was one of the best bets of the year.
Yeah, that was a good one for sure. I went with Max Holloway plus 170 against Justin Gaethje. I felt going into that fight, Holloway was going to be a difficult matchup for him. To me, Holloway's cardio and his output are just outstanding. He's a better boxer than Gaethje. I felt like if Gaethje couldn't severely damage him with leg kicks, it was going to be a bad night for him. I was favoring Holloway outright, and turns out he controlled that fight to the very end and then finished the fight. And for me, that was one of my best.
Incredible bet. I mean, it was a pillar to post domination followed by one of the best knockouts of the year. So, and it was plus 170. So amazing bet. My next one was Alexander Volkov at plus 200 against Sergey Pavlovich. I mean, it was super scary fading a guy like Sergey Pavlovich. And I did it twice in a row because I faded him with Aspinall as well. But Volkov seems to have turned a corner his last few fights. I think he's been training in the States. He's been putting on size. He's just been looking great these last few fights. Even that Gon fight that he allegedly lost, I thought he looked fantastic in. But yeah, plus 200 against Pavlovich, and he jabbed his head back for 3 straight rounds. Give me that as one of my best bets of the year.
Yeah, that one was as good as it gets, really. Next, I'm going to go with Chase Hooper plus 125 against Slava Borshev. You know, going into that fight, I kind of felt like whoever was the winner was hindsight going to look like a big favorite, and it turned out to be true. For me, I just in general tend to gravitate towards the grappler in a striker-grappler matchup. It turns out Hooper actually hurt him on the feet, which, you know, I didn't see coming. You know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I did. But once that fight hit the mat, it was just long gone. So it turns out that Hooper was a good size favorite in that fight. And the fact that I got him at plus money in retrospect seems really good.
Hooper looks like a grown-ass man at 155 pounds. You love to see it. So that was a fantastic bet on your part. My next best bet was Manon Fiorot plus 170 against Aaron Blanchfield. Anytime you can get the best fighter in the division at plus 170 odds. And like, I love Aaron Blanchfield. She's incredible. I bet her against Rose Namajunas in her next fight after that. But like going into it, my analysis was wrong, Gombas. I said it should be minus 110 apiece. I was way off. It should have been like minus 250 Fiorot. But either way, plus 170 when I lined it before the fact, minus 110. Big value, great bet. 5-round domination, and look out for her to challenge Valentina next.
Yeah. Next, I'll go with Brian Ortega plus 145 against Yair Rodriguez. So this is the second time these two fought. First time I had nothing on it. Ortega was like a minus 185 favorite, if I remember correctly. I thought that was about right. The fight, you know, didn't really play out that much. And, you know, Yair's obviously a talented kicker, and, you know, in a striking fight, I'd favor him against Ortega. But Ortega historically, you know, he's super durable. He's tough. He's the much better grappler than Yair. And I thought there was a big market overcorrection there, given the fact that their first fight ended via injury. And, you know, I backed Ortega as the underdog in the second fight. Even to the point where, you know, if you remember watching that fight in the warm-ups, Brian Ortega seriously hurt his ankle. And even with that, after a round, I was adding to it live. I was like, he's going to win. He survived, Yair's best shots early. And I think he has much better cardio. So again, a situation where I feel like if they fought again, I would have Ortega as a pretty good size favorite.
Fantastic bet. I was actually on Yair, not that time, but the first time when Yair was the underdog. And my breakdown was like, I don't know what's going to happen. This is a dog or pass situation. So I'm proud of myself that I took Yair the first time. I didn't get arrogant from the fluke injury, go back and then lay chalk on him the second time. I sat out the second time, which I should have taken my original advice and just taken the dog. But at least I didn't lose money on it. So good job to you. My next best bet was Doo Ho Choi against Landwehr. I mean, he looked incredible against Landwehr. And like, people completely forgot about Doo Ho Choi, and there were a lot of misconceptions. Like, for example, the Kyle Nelson fight, people completely forgot about that, but Doo Ho Choi won every single round of that fight. They somehow call it a draw. I thought he looked great in that fight. Then his next fight against Algio builds off the momentum. So I was already convinced Doo Ho Choi was back, but everyone was still stuck on, you know, his losses from like 2018 or whatever. So I'm like, Landwehr gets hit every single fight. He gets dropped in most of his fights, and Doo Ho's not Landwehr wants to drag you into his wars, the famous Nate Landwehr war, but it's like Doo Ho Choi is in the Hall of Fame for those kind of wars against Cub Swanson. So I was like, Doo Ho's no stranger to this. So Doo Ho plus 118, that was one of the best bets of the year.
Yeah, that one was great. Next, I'll go with one that just happened this past weekend. Dustin Jacoby plus 275 against Vitor Petrino. Actually, I'll loop 2 in there. I'll say fading Vitor Petrino because I had Anthony Smith plus 425 and Dustin Jacoby plus 275. Again, it's just a typical case of like a guy who I think is good. Like, I think Petrino is a good fighter, but he was being priced like he's Superman. You know, Dustin Jacoby is a very good fighter. He's an elite kickboxer. And I just felt going into that fight that there was no real way that Petrino would cover a big price unless he landed a knockout shot. I felt very strongly going in that he wasn't going to have significant grappling success. I've seen his wrestling. I've seen Dustin Jacoby's takedown defenses, get-ups. I felt pretty good that if Petrino got him down, he'd get right back up, which, he did get him down once. He got right back up. And the fight was 1-1 going into the third round. And, it's anybody's fight. I'm taking plus 275, and then Jacoby knocks him out in the third. And I felt good. I felt good about that one, win or lose. Obviously, happy to have won it. But I felt even if Petrino ended up edging that fight, that line was wrong.
Fantastic bets on your part, man. For me, my next one was a trifecta of 3 bets, and it was my breakthrough fighter of the year. Joaquin Buckley was also my biggest money train of 2024. And I bet on him in 3 of his 4 UFC fights in 2024. So I bet him against Luque, Wonderboy, Colby. I obviously sat out the Ruzaboya fight because he was like minus 400 there, but he was very nicely priced against, the established veterans in Colby, Wonderboy, and Luque. And he dominated all 3 of them. So he finished all 3 of them. So yeah, Buckley, the Buckley trifecta, definitely up there.
Yeah, I mean, he had an incredible year and was obviously undervalued in a lot of spots.
Yeah, and then lastly, I think you and I were on both of these. We got to give a shout out to Topuria.
Yeah.
What you did to Volkanovski at plus 110 odds, Gombas. Okay, it wasn't like he was a big favorite. Plus 110 odds. And then what he did to Max, he was a big favorite there, minus 245. But so what? He covered it and then some. So got to give a big shout out to Topuria for that 2-0 run in 2024. Now we got to get to the worst bets. So just like my best bets, I got a lot of these. So feel free to add to yours. I'm gonna start off. My first worst bet of 2024. This is probably one of my all-time worst bets. Timothy Kawamba at minus 185 odds against Lucas Almeida. Like what? Like these are the exact kind of bets I never want to make again. A completely unproven guy versus someone who's more experienced at chalk. Like, what the fuck was I thinking? So, yeah, Timothy Kawamba minus 185 against Lucas Almeida. Not only one of the worst bets of this year, but one of the worst bets I've ever made in my life.
For me, number one happened in the I think it was the second card of the year. It might have even been second card of the year. Johan Lainez as a favorite against Sam Patterson. Obviously, Patterson was like a big favorite there. The big error for my handicapping was I didn't really think Patterson was as much of a grappling threat as he was. And, he submitted him after taking him down. That's one of those spots where, generally I don't like to lay chalk against guys who have a grappling edge. Obviously there's different circumstances. It goes way beyond that. But just as like a first layer rule for me is I don't like doing that. But obviously, I thought it was a good idea at the time. It turned out not to be.
Yeah, and I think maybe a factor that a lot of us didn't consider, I wasn't on that, but I also didn't take Patterson, was Patterson moving up to 70s. He had gotten brutally knocked out at 55s, was cutting too much weight. Looks a lot better at 70s. So, yeah. My next one was Mateus Nicolau at minus 170 against Alex Perez. I fell in love with the fact that long time ago, Nicolau cashed one of my biggest bets ever, a 6-unit bet against Louis Smolka. And ever since then, I've had a soft spot for him, which is stupid. Like, that was one individual bet. Then I go bet him against Dustin Ortiz. He gets smoked in the first round. Then I go bet him against Alex Perez at minus 170, gets smoked in the second round. So, like, yeah, just that learning lesson of you got to take it fight by fight, matchup by matchup. So just because he smoked Smolka, which was an incredible matchup for him, does not mean that he was going to go out there and do that against much better competition. So I completely counted out Alex Perez, and I paid for it with Nicolau's consciousness. So, yeah, that's my next worst bet of 2024.
Yeah, the next one, I'm just double, triple confirming that this is the only bet that I gave out at minus 200 or worse that lost this entire year. I'm almost through. I'm pretty sure minus 200, minus 200. Yeah, okay. The only bet that I gave out at minus 200 or worse that lost in the year 2024 was Ricky Simone against Vinicius Oliveira.
What was the odds? Sorry.
Minus 215.
Okay.
And, it was one of those spots where, I felt like we were selling high. He came off the KO of the year, which we both talked about. And I was like, oh, he's fighting a guy like Ricky Simone who's going to get in his face, who's going to put him up against the cage, who's going to drag him around, who's got great cardio. And it just turned out to be a total dud. He clearly didn't look even – he didn't even look like a pick'em there, let alone minus 215. So obviously laying minus 215 there was a very bad one.
Yeah, one for me for similar reasons as yours. Besides the price, this was a little bit lower price. Was JSP Jonathan Pierce minus 145 against Onama? How was there any value in that? And plus, coming off the performances he was coming off of, I don't know how I thought that there was an edge at that price against Onama. And another spot like that, I'm gonna name one other one. Azat Maxim minus 190 against Charles Johnson. I was super arrogant going into that fight. I was thinking I was doing the whole, when Eddie Alvarez was in the UFC and he was like, if you're a top 10 guy and you haven't figured out how to beat Anthony Pettis yet, there's a problem. So I was like, if you're a top 15 flyweight and you haven't figured out how to beat Charles Johnson yet, there's a problem. And Azat Maxim actually hurt him badly in the first round. And then the unproven aspects of the fighter came out. Charles Johnson took over and did what Charles Johnson does. So I was very, very mad at myself. Laying a price like that on an unproven fighter. There seems to be a theme here, Gombas, for these bad bets.
Yeah, for me, the next one, I went with Grasso versus Shevchenko. I bet it at minus 110. It closed much higher than that. I shouldn't say much. It closed higher than that. So in that price, in that aspect, it wasn't bad. But the way the fight actually played out, Valentina dominated her pillar to post over 5 rounds. It was a much different fight than the first 2 fights. And yeah, I felt foolish by the end of it because it was a dominant fight and not dominant on the side I wanted it to be. She obviously got controlled for, tremendous amounts of the fight, and Valentina looked like a very sizable favorite.
And then I got 2 more worst bets. So first one, Serhi Sidi minus 175 against Ramon Taveras. In my breakdown, Gombas, I said, man, this is going to be a close war. It could go either way. I'm going to lean with Sidi, but I'm not sure. Then on Friday, Ramon Taveras misses weight by 4.5 pounds. So I'm like, oh, okay, fuck everything I just said about this fight potentially being 50-50. Now all of a sudden I've convinced myself that Serhi Sidi has this big edge at minus 175 when I literally broke down the fight a few days prior saying it's 50-50. So how am I letting a weight miss affect my analysis of the fight? And I paid for it. Minus 175, terrible bet.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
And then the last one, you talked about your minus 200 that lost. Let's talk about my minus 200 that lost. Zhu Rong against Chris Padilla. I was going into that thinking, hey, this Chris Padilla guy's a jobber. His fight against Yontop was probably going to be his only UFC win. This guy won't be on the roster this time next year. I just completely disrespected him. And I'm sorry, my friend, but Zhu Rong, you know what I'm saying? I was wrong. So shout out to Padilla on that. But I just hope to learn from these. The mistakes I made, I want to be very clear about it. I'm not sitting here being like, oh, I was on the value side, or oh, if they ran it back, I'm not pulling any of that bullshit. I want to learn from these mistakes so that they don't happen again next year, because every single worst bet I mentioned, there's a common theme. So I just want to eliminate that from my process going forward.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. For me, next, Michelle Waterson plus 170 versus Jillian Robertson. I felt pretty strongly about it going into the fight. Turned out to just be way wrong. I felt like historically Waterson did really well against grapplers, and which, Jillian Robertson is obviously a strong grappler. And there was some stat, I might even still have it written down somewhere. Yeah, I do. Robertson going into that fight is 8-1 in the UFC when she gets 2 or more takedowns. But she's 2-5 in the UFC when she gets 1 or less takedowns. And Waterson had only been taken down 2 or more times once in 14 UFC fights, which to me going into that was like, I was getting alarm bells everywhere around my head, and it just turned out to be way, way off. Obviously, all of Waterson's fights aren't necessarily relevant in 2024, and Robertson is still on that upward trajectory. And so there was just a miscalculation by me there. I don't necessarily even regret making the bet because to me, like even rereading that now, the thought process still checks out. But maybe just in terms of sizing, like I could have sized that bet down a little bit because there still were some question marks going into that. But yeah, I mean, obviously it turned out that Robertson was a huge favorite there.
To your credit, you have a lot of success with those angles historically. We talked about it earlier in the show. The kind of older fighter that's counted out at a good price, right? You have a lot of success with that. This just happened to not be one of those, but you learn from it. So now we got to talk about the UFC champs this time next year. Who do we predict them to be? So let's go back and forth. Let's start with each weight class. You give one, I give one. So let's start off with the flyweight division, men's flyweight. Who you think is going to be the men's flyweight champion this time next year?
Okay, just to preface this, I got a little funky with some of these.
Same.
125 was a really hard one. Like to me, it was almost like throwing a dart at a dartboard. I ended up picking Moreno. It wouldn't surprise me if it was Pantoja. Obviously, you know, he's beaten Moreno. He's beaten these other guys. Wouldn't surprise me if it's Royval. He's proven that he could beat any of those guys. I do feel like at the end of the day, and again, I bet on Pantoja versus Moreno at dog money the last time. I felt like that fight could have went either way. And I think if Moreno, you know, makes some small adjustments, he does look like the favorite there. Also, you know, Pantoja's getting up there in age a little bit. I just feel like Moreno could build off of his last performance. You know, it was a great performance against Albazi. And also in my head, I was trying to think, okay, who's going to be in these matchups? Like, how many matchups are they going to get for the belt this year? And I ended up going with Moreno. But it would not – probably one of my least confident ones because it wouldn't surprise me if it was Pantoja or Royval either.
You know what's funny about the Moreno pick? So obviously anyone that hears you say that is going to tell you that Pantoja has beat him 3 times. Here's your rebuttal to that, Gombas. Well, Alex Pereira beat Izzy 3 times, and on the 4th time, Izzy knocked him the fuck out. So, hey, never count him out. So that's going to be your rebuttal going forward. Listen, man, for me, my flyweight champion this time next year is Manel Kape. I mean, I truly think that this guy's the best flyweight on planet Earth. I think that Manel Kape's, you know, biggest weakness is Manel Kape. Like, if this guy can just get out of his own way, I don't think anyone's stopping him while he's in his prime. He's too fast. He's too explosive. He's too good. You got to get that consistency. And if he can do that, I think he beats all these guys. So Manel Kape is going to be my flyweight champion this time next year. So bantamweight. Who do you think is going to be the bantamweight champ this time next year?
Another really, really hard one. I picked Umar Nurmagomedov, but I want to preface that by saying at the moment, I'm very torn on who's going to win between him and Merab. I'm not like confidently saying he's going to beat Merab. I do think it's going to be one of those two. And I actually, you know, we were talking about pound for pound number 1. I have both those guys in my pound for pound top 5 right now. So that, you know, I don't know if we're talking about anticipated fights at any point, but I'll slide that in there. That's my most anticipated fight of 2025. But I ultimately picked Umar to be the champ at the end of the year.
You know, what's funny? I picked Umar to be the champ at the end of the year too. So we got a consensus there, but it's tough because that has nothing to do with my opinion of Merab being a plus 250 favorite in a UFC fight. You know what I mean? Like, but if take all that aside, just pure pick, I'm gonna go with Umar as well. Featherweight division. Here's where things get really interesting, especially with what Topuria has been saying. What do you think?
I'm going to give you my 145 and 155 pick at the same time because it kind of one leads into the other. I think Topuria is going to end the year as a double champ. I think he's going to defend the belt once, maybe like a Volkanovski rematch. And then I think at the end of the year, he's going to go up to 55 and take the 55 belt, and he'll end the year with both belts.
Wow. That's incredible. I love it. So I wouldn't mind being wrong on my featherweight pick. The only reason I didn't go with Topuria is just because I've been hearing them talk about how he wants to move up. So I'm just going to assume that, you know, he's probably going to vacate the belt or something. So I went with the other undefeated guy in the featherweight division, Movsar Evloev. I mean, he's already beat the majority of the division. People bring up the Aljamain fight, which was a fucking great fight, by the way. But when I scout guys that are future champs, I think about how they would do in 5-round fights. And I truly believe had that Aljamain fight been 5 rounds, Evloev would have won the 4th and the 5th, and it would have been a 4-1 score. So this whole, man, it was a 50-50 fight with Aljo. That wouldn't have been a talking point had that been a 5-round fight. Fantastic fight. But I think Evloev can push into those championship rounds. Hasn't been given the chance to prove that. But every single 3rd round I've seen him in, minus the Hakeem Dawodu fight, He's looked super fresh. So I have no reason to believe that this guy's going to slow down in championship rounds. And I think that he just has a certain hustle about him. He doesn't have the one punch power that Topuria has. He doesn't have the hands that Topuria has, but he just has a certain motor and hustle about him. Can get out of any bad position you put him in, any submission you put him in. Even when he's hurt, he keeps pushing forward. He's got championship qualities. So if Topuria is going to vacate that belt, then I'm going to go with Movsar Evloev to be the UFC featherweight champ this time next year. So the lightweight champ, you said it's going to be Topuria, and I think I'm going to surprise you with mine. I think that the UFC lightweight champion this time next year is going to be Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, this guy's already fought Islam Makhachev. I actually watched the fight last night, and it was Arman's debut on short notice, and it was a badass fight. It was competitive. Like, he can compete with this guy. I'm telling you, he can compete with this guy. And Islam Makhachev is an incredible fighter, amazing, one of the best in the world. But I think that these weight cuts to 55 are getting tougher, man. My proof, the first Volkanovski fight and the Poirier fight. Both those fights showed me this man is human. This man is not invincible, and this man can be beaten. And this man needs to go up to 170 pounds. I think Arman Tsarukyan is going to be the UFC lightweight champion this time next year. So the welterweight division, here's where things get really interesting, because you got the Shavkats, you got the Ian Garys, Joaquin Buckley is coming up as well. Bilal's the champ, Leon and Kamaru, the old school, they're still ranked up highly. What do you think about who's going to be the welterweight champion this time next year?
Okay, so last year I made an extremely out-of-the-box pick for 170, and I'm sticking with it for this year. I'm going to say Sean Brady, and I picked him last year thinking he'd be more active this year. He only had one fight, but he looked pretty damn good doing it against Gilbert Burns. And the way I see it, I'm saying the same thing I said last year. I think Bilal's his hardest matchup in the division. So I don't necessarily think he's going to beat Bilal. I don't even think he'd probably get a fight against Bilal. My thinking is if someone else unseats Bilal and he beats that person. I think it's one of those spots where Brady could learn a lot from that loss to Muhammad a couple of years ago, and I think he has. I mean, he dominated Kelvin Gastelum at the end of last year, beat Gilbert Burns, who's also a very credentialed jiu-jitsu guy and has fought for a belt before. I don't know who he's going to get next, but that division is going to be very interesting at the top. You mentioned guys like Shavkat, who I'm assuming, is going to fight for the belt in the first or second quarter of next year. Maybe Kamaru Usman gets Jack Della. Maybe Brady gets Jack Della. So it's going to be interesting there, but I'm going with my out-of-the-box pick. I've kind of maintained the belief for a while now that Sean Brady's better than people think he is.
He's very good, obviously. This is a tough one for me for a couple of reasons. So obviously, I think the current champ is the most counted out fighter in the UFC and the most profitable fighter in the UFC, but he's coming off of like a serious injury. I don't know if people understand how serious the injury he had was. Like, it's one thing to have a staph infection, but if that staph isn't treated and it goes to the bone and becomes a bone infection, like, bro, that is brutal. And I'm not sure about the first part being true in terms of he had a staph and then it turned into, what it was. But the fact that the dude's got a bone infection, we just have to proceed with caution, because you got to make sure you do things the right way to come back from that. That is not a fucking joke. You know who I think, you might actually think this is kind of controversial. You know who I think is Bilal's biggest threat? Jack Della. Why do I think Jack Della is Bilal's biggest threat? Yes, Jack Della gets taken down in fights, but Jack Della has zero quit in him, man, and he can scramble off his back and then on the feet. This guy's got nasty ass hands. Now, regarding Brady, there was a rumor of Brady calling out Leon. So you got Brady in that if they run it?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. And then you never know if JDM's going to fight Usman. Carlos Praches has been calling out JDM. He could sneak in the picture. So this is the toughest one. Go ahead.
Usman's another guy I'm not counting out in that division at all, just because he lost a 3-round fight to Chimaev that he looked really good in, and he's lost to Leon. Like, nah, he could still hang with any of those guys, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt. And then there's obviously Shavkat, who was unanimously considered the boogeyman of the division until the Gary fight. I mean, I didn't think he looked bad versus Gary. I think that's, what was it? 19-0 versus like 15-0. Like, it's going to be a competitive fight when you get two guys that don't want to lose their undefeated records. I'm going to pick Bilal, but it's very contingent on the health stuff, you know, going his way, because that's a serious injury he has. So if he can return to form, I'm gonna pick him. I'm gonna officially pick him because I can only give one official pick. If for whatever reason he can't return to form, I'll go Jack Della. But official pick, I'll go Bilal. Middleweight division. I think we have a consensus here. I think the fans know exactly who we got. We got the actual boogeyman, not just the middleweight division, but of the UFC. We both went with Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, I think fate conspired to arrange his UFC title battle, you know, and I think that it's destiny and fate that this guy holds UFC gold at some point, period, point blank.
I picked him last year when we did this. I'm doing it again. Similar to the Brady thing, where it's not like he went out there and lost. He just didn't fight as much as I had hoped. But man, the way he ran through Whitaker was – I thought he was going to beat Whitaker. I actually ended up betting him late against Whitaker. I didn't think it was going to be necessarily that easy. Like, wow. To do that to Robert Whitaker, you are a freak. I think he'd give any. I'd probably favor him against any of those guys. I know the UFC's been trying to make a push for him. It hasn't always worked out, like visa-wise, like out of the cage issues. But I think, you know, this is probably where it all comes together.
Who you got between Khamzat Chimaev and Alex Pereira?
Chimaev.
Yeah, like this guy could be a multi-division champ. It sucks he can't make 70s anymore, but he was killing himself to do that. Imagine a 3-division champ, but possibly a 2-division champ. You never know. So let's see what happens. But here's one of my favorite weight classes. The premier division is finally back. The light heavyweight division. You know, at one point, this is the division that had Chuck Liddell, Rampage, Rashad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now we got some studs back in there. So who you think is going to be the UFC light heavyweight champ this time next year?
This was another really hard one for me. I ended up picking Ankalaev, but I also think that guys like Jamal Hill will be heard from. Like, I don't think, you know, he's going anywhere. Obviously, Pereira's got the target on his back. I don't think if I could pick not Pereira, I would. Like, I think someone's going to snatch the belt from him this year. I'm going to say Ankalaev, but I'm going to also say not Pereira.
I'm going to go with Jamal Hill. Listen, man, I think that this year, well, next year, 2025, is going to be a year of tremendous value on Hill because he said some shit that people disagree with on Twitter. So now he's an underdog to Jiri. Like Gombas, like he would have been a favorite to Jiri, I don't know, under any normal circumstance. Like he's an underdog to Jiri, but it's not because of fighting abilities or fighting skills. It's because he talked shit online or whatever. Like that's why. So I separate myself from all that bullshit. And when I see the guy with the best volume in the history of the division, we're talking about a division that John Jones ruled for over 10 years. We're talking about a division, all the legends I mentioned have been in that division. And this guy has the highest output we've ever seen. And people can discredit it, say all they want. Oh, Glover was old. Well, Glover's fight right before that was a fight of the year against Jiri, which he was winning. And it came down to like the last round where, you know, Jiri caught him. But like up until then, Glover wasn't looking old. Glover was on his way to winning that Jiri fight. And then the next fight against Hill, like, so check this out. On our show, the award show, we gave Jiri and Glover the fight of the year. And then the next year, I gave Jamal the performance of the year. So think about that. There's a big difference between a fight of the night and a performance of the night. And I think that Hill is about to remind people that he's just different, man. He's just different. I think he's going to be the UFC light heavyweight champion this time next year. Y'all must have forgot, man. Like, don't let the Twitter stuff fool you. This guy can fight his ass off. So yeah, it's music to our ears. I get plus 110 on this guy against Jiri, the guy with no striking defense whatsoever. Say less. And I'm not giving away my edge, Gombas. It's just like me talking about Bilal. It doesn't matter what I say. People love who they love and hate who they hate. And we get good odds as a result. Now, the heavyweight champion. Who do you think is going to be the baddest man on the planet this time next year?
I think your pound for pound number one, John Jones, is you know, I do think the Aspinall fight ends up happening. And, you know, I don't really see Jones being like a super active fighter this year. I think they'll probably do the Aspinall fight, and that's going to be his mega fight. So in my opinion, if he wins that one, he probably ends the year champ, and I think he beats Aspinall.
Yeah, so this is interesting because I'm actually going with Aspinall, but that doesn't necessarily mean I think Aspinall is going to beat Jones. I think it can be a situation where they fight sooner than we all think, like I've been predicting. And let's say Jones wins the fight, right? I say if Jones wins, Jones retires, vacates the belt, then you get Aspinall versus Cyril Gane or Volkov or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think Aspinall wins that. Or the other scenario, Aspinall becomes the first man in UFC history to beat John Jones. Then it's a little bit easier to end the year as champ. But regardless, if he wins or loses versus Jones, as long as the fight happens in like, the first 2 quarters of the year, if it happens like late 2025, then there's no chance of this prediction coming true. But as long as the fight happens early in the year, I'm going Tom Aspinall to be the UFC heavyweight champion this time next year. Now we got to talk about the women's divisions. 115 pounds, the smallest division in the UFC. And they just announced Tatiana Suarez is taking on Zhang Weili. So you think one of those two might be the champion this time next year?
I picked Tatiana Suarez. I think it's a really tough one because I find it hard to gauge where she's at in terms of like what stage of her career she's at right now. I think if she looks the way she did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, I think she beats Zhang. I think she beats everyone in that division. I also think she got a little bit too much heat for the what was it, the Montana De La Rosa fight?
Mm-hmm.
Montana De La Rosa is a pretty good wrestler. Like that's the one. I don't mean she's not good at anything. That's the one thing she's known for is wrestling. And I think Tatiana Suarez still could lean on that skill. For me, in a fight with Zhang, 5 rounds is a concern. I haven't seen Tatiana do it. I've seen Zhang do it multiple times. Plus, when you're the one trying to grapple, like when you're the one initiating the grappling, it's a little bit more taxing. Yeah, so I picked her, but I think that's probably one of my bolder predictions.
I think everyone knows who I'm picking. I'm picking the same person I've picked the last few years in a row, and this year it's finally going to happen. Yan Xiaonan is going to become an undisputed UFC strawweight champion in 2025. She had some great moments against Zhang Weili in their fight. She dropped her twice. She took her down a couple of times, but Zhang Weili, she's a tough out. But one thing I like about Yan Xiaonan, well, there's lots of things I like, but now that, because Gombas, when we scout our prospects, we scout, what's their potential ceiling. But once your prospect gets to that title fight and they lose that title fight, you kind of got to reset your goals of where you think the fighter is going to go, right? Because every fighter's dream is to be a world champion. And when that dream's taken away from you, you often see fighters come back from that title loss. They don't look the same. Like Brandon Moreno, when he came back after losing to Pantoja against Royval, he looked like, is Moreno looking kind of washed? And then he puts the clinic against Albazi, right? So I'm just saying, with Xiaonan, she comes back off her title loss against Zhang Weili at UFC 300 and takes on Tabitha Ricci, and that could have been the ultimate letdown spot. And in fact, when you hear her interviews, she was talking about how, wow, knowing that I can hang with Zhang Weili just elevated my confidence to let me know, like, I do belong. I can be a world champion. And now I really want to pursue that. She puts an absolute clinic on Tabitha Ricci, showed she's nowhere near her level. And I think maybe a Virna Jandiroba title eliminator. If not, put her in there with the winner of Zhang Weili and Tatiana Suarez. I know she's up against both, but I think she can beat both. And I'm going to pick her to be the UFC strawweight champion this time next year. Women's flyweight division. Who do you think is going to be the women's flyweight champion this time next year?
I went with one of your best bets of the year. Fierro, I think, is the best fighter at 125 right now. Big, well-rounded. I think she probably ends the year with the belt. I'd favor her against anyone in the division.
Yeah, and I do as well. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think she's the best fighter right now at 125 pounds. I think she's more well-rounded than Valentina. And simply put, I think she's going to be the one to dethrone the great Valentina Shevchenko. And last but not least, women's bantamweight. And once again, we have another consensus. We had a consensus on flyweight with Fiorot, and now we both have a consensus with Kayla Harrison becoming the UFC bantamweight champion. The only way I could see this not happening is if Amanda maybe comes back. But if Amanda doesn't come back, I don't see any of these girls beating Kayla. They might give her, a tough time because these girls are no slouches, but ultimately, Kayla Harrison's a big girl at 135. I mean, she used to fight at 55s and win belts in other organizations. I think she's ready to win that UFC belt. at 35s.
Amen. She's going to smash some people for sure.
So another one of my favorite categories, and we always save the best for last, the Andrew Gombas Handicapper of the Year. So Andrew Gombas was the first man to win this award in 2022. You had a monster year. The next year, we gave it to Pepe. He had a monster year. Now in 2024, this one's been interesting because lots of people have struggled this year. This year, you had to like look few and far between to see someone having consistency, to see someone having serious numbers and real sharp reads, and even revolutionize the game and show what kinds of things are possible in MMA handicapping and MMA betting in general. So it's my honor to announce, and now the two-time Half the Battle Handicapper of the Year, Andrew Gombas. Congrats. I mean, it was a no-brainer. You were up close to 40 units with like a 17 or 18% ROI. Show me better numbers than that. And I'm not talking about any of these dudes tracking openers or, you know, any of the, I'm talking about dudes that play the game the real way. Guys that are paying their bills with this shit. Guys that you don't even need to do this anymore. You don't even need to sell bets anymore. But again, close to 40 units, 18% ROI. That's all I had to see. Congrats, kid. You're the 2024 Half the Battle Handicapper of the Year and the first ever two-time Half the Battle Handicapper of the Year.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Means a lot, obviously. What I am most proud of, that, you know, this is my 7th year tracking bets that I've, you know, sold or tipped to people. What made this, in my opinion, my most impressive year was I did it only tipping widely available UFC money lines. There was no props. There was no Cage Warriors. There was no Bellator. There was no PFL. You know, some of that lower hanging fruit. There were no over-unders. It was widely available.
No parlays.
No parlays. It was widely available UFC money lines. And so, you know, it's not really a secret that I'm betting more than what I'm tipping. I'm only tipping the stuff that I'm able to feel confident that people are going to be able to get down the amount they want to get down at the same or similar price to what I did. So the fact that I was able to do that, you know, really made me feel good because, you know, at this point in my life, I wasn't relying on selling picks for a meaningful amount of my income. But what meant a lot to me, you know, two things. One of them, you'll probably makes me seem like a good guy, and one of them probably doesn't. One of them was ego. Like I really wanted to, I felt like I had something to prove. I didn't have my best year tipping stuff last year. And, you know, I could have stopped doing it then. I could have stopped doing it a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever. But I felt like I had something to prove. And I really, you know, I saw this as a competition for a really long time. You know, back when I was in college, like I found out people like yourself and some others like sold their picks, and I thought it was super cool and I wanted to do it. And I just put so much time into it ever since then. So even before I realized you could be, you know, I'm 20 years old at the time. Even before I realized that being a pro bettor was possible, I was like, I want to be one of those people that people want to, you know, pay for their information. Like that's super cool. And so I wanted to be a person that sold picks even before I wanted to be a pro bettor. And, you know, to be able to do it for 7 years and to profit in all 7 really meant something to me from like a competitive standpoint, because I felt like for a long time I was and, you know, now I realize that wasn't the goal. Like obviously, you know, much bigger things end up happening. But I'm talking about at the time, like I'm going back to my early 20s self. Like I always felt like I didn't get enough credit, which is like silly, you know, looking for approval, and like it wouldn't have changed anything anyway. But I felt like there were years where, you know, I crushed it, and I didn't have many people caring or buying my picks or whatever, and I always felt like a little bit slighted. And so for one, it was ego is why I wanted to keep going up to this point. And then two, which that was the part that probably looked silly, but the part that hopefully is at least a little bit honorable is I did and do genuinely feel good about people being able to profit from my advice, opinion, all that stuff. And yeah, I'm really glad we were able to do what we did, and it's time for me to just bet in peace. I feel like for such a long time I wanted that recognition, and now I'm kind of ready to bow out and not get any recognition anymore. But yeah, anyway, I'm going way long here. I appreciate the nice words, and hopefully I helped people along the way.
You absolutely did, and you deserve this. I wouldn't give it to you just because you're my friend. You earned this award. I personally encourage you to keep tracking. I know you're going to do whatever you want. The reason I encourage you to do that is because let's say next year you have an 150 unit year. Let's say next year you have the most historic year you have I don't know, you're currently up like 250 units or something. Let's say next year, for whatever reason, let's say you win 250 units. You just do something legendary and it's not there. I know you're not looking for recognition anymore. You got what you got what you deserve, but like, man, I don't know. I think that you should get to a 10-year sample size. You don't got to sell bets anymore. You don't got to listen to anyone's bullshit, but it would just be cool if you go out there, have the best year of your life, and it's all there documented. I know it's documented privately, and but it'd be cool for the world to see that you're still, the best in the world.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that. This is going to sound so crazy to most people. I had to like mentally become okay with the idea that I could win an MMA bet and not have it tracked. Like for a long time, like I cared so much about like the tracked and tipped side of it that I wouldn't feel as good about, like, I obviously made bets that aren't tracked. I obviously bet props. I obviously bet PFL. I obviously bet Bellator. And, I don't say a word about it, but it was a mental hurdle to be able to say, like, if I know a line's about to move, I'm like, I know I can't tip this. And like, I bet it. And I'm like, I can't tell anyone that, I had that Roy Val. I'm pretty sure I didn't like tip that Roy Val versus Tyra bet, for example. Like I bet it close to post. Like it just what for whatever. Like there's plenty of examples of that. Like I probably sent out like a 20% maybe of the bets I made this year, and now it's easy for me. I don't need it anymore. But there was a point in time where it was really, really, really hard for me to make a bet that wasn't tracked, because I'm like, oh my God, last year I'm only documented up 1 unit, but I know I did so much better. Like I wish other people realized it. Or like this year, again, this is not like me trying to pat myself on my own back. I did a lot better than almost 40 units, like a lot better. And you talk about like, oh, what if you have a legendary year, whatever. Like in my mind, I feel like I did, and I'm okay with no one knowing. If I have the best year of all time next year, and no one knows, like that's cool with me. Hopefully, people just feel like hopefully people still feel like I'm able to help in some way, even though I'm not saying like XYZ units on this fight. Or like I still plan on, doing stuff like this with you and, sharing my thoughts, because I do want to still, help people here and there. It's just too much of a time crunch and like mental crunch to try to be like, all right, I'm hoping this line holds without me betting too much where it moves, or like I don't want to feel like I'm giving out a bet at a secondary level. Like I don't want to take minus 125 and give out minus 140. Like it just doesn't really feel right to me. I'd rather, give people the information and let them do what they want with it where I can. And where I can't, I'm okay not doing that. Like I'm not forcing it. There's bets I made this year where I had tons where really good spots where I'm quiet about it. You'd never know I took it. You'd never know I didn't, because I'm not going to be that guy that goes on Twitter and was like, oh, untracked, I had this.
Hey, I lost on my track bets, but my live bets won.
Yeah. Yeah, like I haven't mentioned a live bet in years, and it's not because I don't live bet that. It's not because I don't live bet. It's just because, it's just not for me anymore. But anyway, yeah, I'm very comfortable now, just doing what I do in peace, and I'm proud of that, because at a certain point I felt like I needed the recognition, and I feel like I've gotten over that mental hurdle. Like I'll even give you, not that you even asked for this, but I'll even go into a little bit of a rant about like selling picks in general, if that's okay. So I sold picks for 7 years. I feel like there's only a finite amount of time where it makes sense for someone that has an edge to share picks. First, I'll use myself as an example. First couple of years, I probably had an edge betting props and openers, I was still learning a lot. Then there was a sweet spot of a few years where it did make sense for me to sell picks because I could win betting widely available lines, but I hadn't built up the bankroll yet to where I could just live off that. Then the last few years, it was more like, okay, why am I still doing this? So that was kind of, how at least I separated, I put it into 3 parts. The beginning, I had an edge betting props and openers. Then I was like the sweet spot where it did still make sense, where I did have a legit edge and I hadn't scaled it up enough. Then the last few years, it was like, all right, yeah, this is probably overkill at this point. And so anyway, those are my way too winded thoughts on just betting and selling and MMA in general.
We've talked about it. No, we've talked about it many times. It's very stressful going to bed, waking up, having, you post a bet and then everyone's questioning you about that bet and just dealing with all the people. I completely understand, but you can still track without dealing with anybody. You make the bet, go track it, done deal. I don't know. I'd
probably still have to deal with people.
Yeah. You're gonna have to deal with people anyways. Like if you do a podcast with Magic, if you post an opinion on Twitter, you're gonna have to deal with people no matter what. But
I've thought about completely I honestly have thought about completely ghosting for that reason, but I didn't because I landed on not doing that because I do enjoy interacting with people like yourselves. And then I do still want to help people where I can. So that's why I landed on sticking around.
Well, you still got time before 2025. So I hope don't reconsider selling bets because, you're beyond that now, but reconsider tracking because I'd love to give you a third award. And I'm planning, I never told you this, but I'm planning on actually getting trophies engraved. You already got 2 with your name on them. Awesome. You might have to clean up your shelf for a third. So I encourage you to, I encourage you to track is all I say.
I'm looking around right now and I've definitely got a couple spots that those would look good in.
Yeah. So just consider it is all I'm saying. But besides that, man, I'm proud of you. Congratulations. You deserve everything that's come your way and even more. So congrats, bro. And all respect, of course.
Thank you. It means a lot. Now,
last but not least, the Dan Levy Comeback Capper of the Year. So everyone knows that I think it was I don't even remember. I've been doing this so long, but 2021 was my worst year. And then 2022 was like my best year or something like that. And so I did a big comeback. Andrew Gombas created this category, gave me the Comeback Capper of the Year, which was an honor. Now this year, I actually didn't have one, but you did. So let's go ahead and announce it. The 2024 Dan Levy Comeback Capper of the Year is Brooks Koepka. Congrats, Brooks. You're the winner. Andrew, why'd you pick him as the winner?
Yeah, I picked him as the winner. Obviously, candidly, I know him very well. And MMA wise, he kind of before I knew him, he kind of came on to like bet MMA and had like a monster couple of years, like 2020, 2021, then really cooled off for a couple of years. 2022 and 2023 combined were down and then came back this year, 17 units, 7% ROI. So it was nice to see him. I know he does really well in general, but nice to see him in the back to his old ways on MMA stuff. Really, like there weren't that many to choose from this year because I feel like, first of all, you mentioned it, a lot of people who are like, I again, candidly, I don't really follow like the MMA Twitter space maybe as closely as I did 3 years ago, 5 years ago. So leading up to this, like I do my prep for the KO of the year by looking up a bunch of KOs of the year. I was going through Bet MMA and looking through a lot of people's records and like I didn't see, and this isn't to be like mean or anything.
No, it's the truth.
I just didn't see a lot to write home about, and I could really only name like a handful of people, like yourselves being one of them, that like won this year that I know that track bets. Like there really just aren't many people to choose from. And I picked Brooks because I know he has he's a good MMA opinion. He had a few really big years early on, and it's nice to see him back in that category.
Absolutely. Congrats, Brooks. Like it's a great honor to feel like you've picked yourself back up after, a bad year and you got to really show what you're capable of. And now you can hopefully use that momentum, carry it into 2025 and do great things. So congrats, Brooks, and congrats, Andrew, on being the first ever 2-time Half the Battle Handicapper of the Year. I hope you consider our conversation. And to the fans, thank you all so much for checking out the 2024 MMA Awards presented to you by Half the Battle. Thank you to my co-host, Andrew Gombas. If this is it as far as you and MMA Twitter and all that, man, it's been a pleasure. Let's still stay in touch. You know, me and Andrew have met in person. We've actually met in Florida before, the same day that Peter Yan fought Aljo the second time. So no, man, I hope you stick around. I'm going to keep encouraging you to track, because you're going to be really pissed off. Maybe not. You're going to be pissed off when you have an 150 unit year. It's not on paper. But then again, the paper will be in your bank. So then again, you might not even give a fuck. But it'll still be cool. So I hope you consider that. Any last words for the fans before we get out of here? I'm pretty sure this is either your last or second to last podcast of the year.
Yeah. I plan on, hopefully if I'm invited back doing this podcast with you again next year, and
maybe. No, of course.
I'll be given I'm looking forward to giving the award to someone else next year. And I appreciate you as always. It's been fun watching your show level up, and I'm sure 2025 will be your best year yet. And thank you to everyone watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and hope everyone has a great holiday.
Absolutely. So for all the fans, y'all know where to follow us. Follow my boy Andrew at Bets and Picks MMA. Follow me at Best Fight Picks on Twitter, at Half the Battle HQ on Twitter, at Half the Battle Pod on Instagram, at Half the Battle Podcast on TikTok. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment, share if you feel so inclined. Really, really appreciate it. I'll be back next week. Got 2 shows next week. Obviously, This Week in MMA, my brand new MMA news show. No fake news around here, only the real news. And we will cover some of the popular topics, but I'll also do some obscure topics as well. So definitely check it out. If you're a hardcore MMA fan, you are going to like my show This Week in MMA. And then just like I do the annual award show with Gombas, I do an annual top 10 boldest predictions for the following year, this time for 2025 with Liam. So that's going to happen next week as well. So 2 shows from me next week. Hope you all enjoy this one, and hope you'll have a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. And until the next time, let's cash these bets.